they are forcing the Jewish mainstream in a certain direction. Okay? All right, so this is a biography of Rabbi Schneerson. And the Shabbat Lubavitch movement was founded in modern-day Belarus. And over time, it went over to America because it suffered a lot of persecution by the Russians. And today, they are a global movement. And they are powerful in Russia, in America, and in Israel. Okay? So we will discuss the Shabbat Lubavitch as we move along, but I want to, with this passage, show you how coordination among eschatologists work, okay? All right? So the year is 1939. And the Nazis, Nazi Germany, again, who are anti-Semitic, they hate Jews, they want all Jews out of Europe, they are overrunning Europe. And by 1939, they have conquered Poland, Warsaw. Okay? Now, Poland, Warsaw is where the head rabbi, the Rebbe of the Shabbat Lubavitch movement is. And his name is Yosef Yetzat. Okay? And he's the father-in-law of Rabbi Schneerson. And he's an old man, and he's in Warsaw, and the Nazis are overrunning the city. So his followers in America are want to save his life, okay? So then the question then is like, but how do you do that? Because America and Germany are not best friends. The war is breaking out in Europe, and Yosef Yewitz is a very old man. And there are no planes, well, there are planes, but there are no commercial air flights that you can take, okay? So it's gonna be a very long, arduous journey across many borders. Plus, he will need a visa, not just for himself, but for his whole family, okay? Now what I'll show you is how powerful these people are. And again, this is an eschatology where they all share similar vision, and therefore they're willing to make the necessary sacrifices in order to help each other achieve this vision, okay? All right, so this is from the biography. In Ocean Away in America, Yosef Yezuit's followers were mounting a rescue effort. With the help of Stan Kramer, an Orthodox attorney, the son of Lubavitcher immigrants, the Shabbat activist Israel Jacobson hired Max Rode, a politically connected lawyer, to secure American visas for Yosef Yewitz and his family, okay? So, in other words, even though there may not be that many followers, they have a wide political circle. And a lot of the reason why is that they pool their resources together. And when they pull their resources together, they're able to invest in real estate together, they're able to invest in business together, and they're able to generate a lot of money, which they can then use to influence politics in America, okay? They can buy out politicians, they can do a lot of things. Okay, so the first part is easy, getting visas for the rabbi and his family. Now the problem is, how do you actually get to him, okay? Because there are no telephones, there's no internet, there are no airplanes. How do you find him when there's a war going on in Poland, when there are Nazis everywhere? Okay, all right, let's continue. Yosef Yewitz's followers also reached out to Attorney General Benjamin Cohen, okay? And Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, okay? This man is very important. He's what we call a Sabbatine Francus. What I'll show you later on is that Sabbatine Francus and the Shabbat Lubavitch movement are very much aligned. Okay, so even though they're not part of the same movement, they are sympathetic towards each other. And he's the most powerful Jew in America at this time, okay, in the 1930s, 40s, whom Yosef Yewitz had met during his fundraising trip of 1929. The Lubavitch efforts in America were successful, all right? So they've won over the Americans. They've won over the entire American political apparatus, and they are dedicated to helping the rabbi escape Europe and come to America. All right? Now the second part is, how do you deal with the Nazis? Okay, the Lubavitch's efforts in America were successful. On October 2nd, Cohen wrote to Robert Pell, a senior official in the State Department, asking for help. The next day, Pell contacted Helmuth Waldhat, a German and a member of the Nazi Party, a Nazi, who specialized in national industry and economics, to see if he would be willing to save one of the leading Jewish scholars in the world. Okay? This is a guy, American, writing to a Nazi and saying, hey man, I know you're a Nazi, but we need your help to save a Jew. And the guy says, yes. Okay? Wohat was strategically chosen. He had studied at Columbia University in the early 1930s and had forged a relationship with Pell after the Evian Conference on Jewish Refugees in 1938. Seeing an opportunity to curry goodwill of the United States, Wohat secretly contacted Admiral William Canaras, the head of German military intelligence. Wow! The head of German military intelligence. And saying, hey man, let's help this guy. Canaris, a skeptical Nazi who disapproved of SS atrocities and thought the invasion of Poland a mistake, enlisted Major Ernst Bloch, a distinguished veteran of World War I and one of the most trusted officers. Bloch was a Mischling. Okay, a Mischling just means a German who had some Jewish ancestry, but because he was so valorous in World War I, he was considered a German. Okay. He had been declared of German blood by Hitler in 1939. Along with 3 other soldiers, 2 of whom were also Mischling, Bloch was instructed to find Josef Yetzet and bring him to safety. Wow. The Nazis, okay, dispatched their own soldiers to find this guy and bring him to America. And this is again during war. But how do you find this guy? Bloch and his colleagues had to maneuver through the ruins of Warsaw without arousing the suspicions of the SS to find a rabbi who did not know of their mission and did not want to be found. Okay, so this rabbi is hiding from everyone. So how do you find this guy? And he's deadly afraid of all German soldiers because he sees them as just Nazis. This is another problem. Well, Jews in the city were naturally unwilling to divulge the location of a Hasidic leader to a Nazi officer. Eventually, the information came from the Americans. Brandeis was informed of Josef Yevet's address by the Shabbat lawyer Arthur Rubinowitz and relayed it via Cohen and Pell to the U.S. chargé d'affaires in Germany. This requires the coordination of dozens and dozens of people who are supposed to be on the opposite side of a war. And they're working together to achieve a goal. At the end of November, Bloch found Josef Yevet's apartment and after some confusion convinced the residents he was there to help. Once he had obtained fuel coupons, train tickets, and military clearances for SS checkpoints, Bloch loaded Josef Yetzet and his family onto a truck and headed for the train station. There the family received first-class tickets and boarded a train filled with Nazi officials and soldiers. Okay, and that's how they got him out. In other words, they are able to work above the bureaucracy of different nation states in order to achieve their eschatological goal. Okay? All right. Does it make sense? All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the idea of eschatological convergence. Because once we know the different eschatologies and we know how they converge together, we can actually make certain predictions about how this war will progress. Okay, so the first major eschatology I want to look at is called Zoroastrianism. And this is the first eschatology, and it's an eschatology of the Persian Empire, okay? And this eschatology is very simple. In the world, there's truth and the lie, okay? The light and the darkness. And it is our responsibility as humans to live for the light, to die for the truth against the lie. And at the end of days, there will be a final battle and a day of judgment, okay? So light versus dark, and then you have a day of judgment. Okay, where the God, Ahura Mazda, will come down and he will create a paradise for everyone. Okay, so what matters is to live a noble life and await the day of judgment where eventually heaven on earth will manifest, okay? And this is important because if you think about how the Iranians are fighting this war, The Iranians refuse to take the initiative and destroy too much, okay? They refuse to be the villains in this war because for them, in their eschatology, it's important to die for the light, to fight for the truth, okay? Now, Zoroastrianism has a major impact on Jewish eschatology, okay? And Jewish eschatology, again, I'm only talking about the most extreme version of this eschatology, okay? And in this eschatology, the idea is that the Jews disobeyed God, okay? Disobedience. And in order to repair the world, to save themselves, to create heaven on earth, they need to engage in redemption, okay? Redemption. And redemption is really about spiritual alchemy, improving yourself as a person, being good to yourself, being good to others, loving your neighbor as though you would love yourself. Okay, that's a mainstream idea. But in the most extreme version, redemption just means acting out God's plan to compel the return of the Messiah. Okay, and this plan is basically create Israel. Return Jewish diaspora, build third temple, and this will often called the War of Gog and Magog. And then when the Jews are most threatened, the Messiah will come to save them from their enemies. And this will create something called the Messianic age, okay? When God rules over the earth through his Messiah, who comes from the house of David. Okay, all right. So again, this is a simple version. There are lots of different versions. This is the most simple version for our purposes, okay? Now, what's interesting is that this Jewish eschatology would go on to influence the Protestants, okay? And this creates a movement called Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism, so the technical word for Christian Zionism is called premillennial dispensationalism. Okay, and this sounds very complicated, but it's not. All it means is that God has a plan for how to create heaven on earth, and we have a duty to fulfill his plan by following his instructions. Okay? All right. So what Christian Zionism is doing is that it takes this Jewish eschatology and makes certain changes to it. Okay? So, for example, the first change that it makes is, okay, this plan is fine, but rather than say that the Jewish Messiah is the representative of God, what they say is that, no, he's actually the representative of Satan. Okay? So the Messiah, in a Jewish tradition, becomes the Antichrist in the Christian Zionist tradition. And why is this important? It's important because for the Christians, the Messiah must be Jesus. Okay? So the Messiah, so the Antichrist, what he does is that he rules over the world. He's very charismatic, and he rules the world in Jerusalem. And he starts the War of Gog and Magog in order to conquer the world and destroy the Jews. At this point, Jesus will return to save God's chosen people, the Jews. And when Jesus returns, there'll be something called the rapture, where all Christians will immediately ascend to heaven. Okay? So the rapture. All right. Okay? So again, Christian Zionism is working off Jewish eschatology, but it's making some important changes. Okay? So another way of saying this is, in the beginning, Zionists and Christian Zionists will work together to reach a certain point of history, okay, what we call the Great Israel Project, but then they will diverge and fight against each other, okay? So they're allies now, but eventually they'll turn against each other. All right, so now I want to talk about the Freemasons. Because the Freemasons, we'll talk more about the Freemasons later, okay? The